You know, it's kind of funny that for all the legendary Japanese creators out there, very few of them have tried to pivot hard into the American market. I mean, sure, nowadays anime is more popular than ever, but as much as trolls like to speculate on it, very rarely is anime actually made exclusively for American consumption. Most anime is just made for Japan first, and if the rest of the world likes it, so be it. Although more recently there have been anime made for the entire world and the international market, but that's not just America. There's never been a big mangaka or even a Japanese film director who said something like, "Well, I've succeeded in Japan and now I'm going to start over again and do it in America." Although Takashi Yamazaki of Godzilla Minus One might end up being the first someday, he's really eyeing a move to Hollywood. Most Japanese creators will just make their stuff for Japan with Japan in mind, and if it gets successful in the wider world, that's great. If it gets censored, that's not their problem. They don't care, half the time they don't even find out about it, and back in the 80s and 90s, we used to be subjected to decades of poor, weird, and bastardized localizations of popular Japanese products. But today I'm talking about wasn't just a censorship. This was a full American reboot of a classic Japanese IP made by the original creator with an American market in mind. And this wasn't a simple censorship or a straight translation. Today we're talking about an ambitious project by Go Nagai. Go Nagai, pretty much a legend in anime, having some of the best and biggest breakout hits of the genre, being a pioneer of a lot of different lanes, arguably starring the super robot trend of the 70s, arguably starring the magical girl trend with Cutie Honey. Nagai famously found international success with his two giant robot shows, Mazinger and Grandizer, which worked because it was a right combination of weird, cool, and angry for the times, that hit with audiences internationally at the times who just wanted to see a big giant robot punch a Nazi in the face. But riding high on the bubble economy of the 1980s, Nagai wanted to give himself some of those sweet American dollars. And so Go Nagai tried exactly one time to reboot Mazinger Z for American audiences and reestablish himself as an American comic book artist. And of course, it did not work out. It was pretty much an instant fail. And this is the bizarre story of that one attempt, the American Mazinger reboot that people nowadays remember as Mazinger USA. Okay, everybody, welcome back. I'm Ian Buster Green, and today we're taking the next step into the Mazinger-verse and talking about the next Mazinger manga chronologically, Mazinger USA. I've previously covered God Mazinger on this channel pretty extensively, but it's been about a year since then. God Mazinger was originally supposed to be an early name for Great Mazinger, but Nagai held on to it and later did its own thing, making a cool God Mazinger story that was a really interesting manga. God Mazinger ended up being one of Nagai's longest and most wild mangas, and then it got turned into a really bland and uninteresting kids anime. But I've already done 2 videos about that, so watch those if you're curious. If you've already finished watching them, then let's move forward. So Mazinger USA comes right after God Mazinger, and it indirectly feels like a kind of weird sequel to that. Now, I was originally asked by someone to review Z Mazinger, which is definitely similar in tone to God Mazinger, but I decided that if I'm going to just do the whole Mazinger verse, I might as well just make a pit stop here, because this is the next step on the evolutionary ladder.
Comics, all new adventures of Speed Racer and the fabulous Mach 5 race car. It's the year 2031, and now Comics is there to cover all the excitement with the Terminator. And Astro Boy, the world's most popular robot hero, now brings a lap a minute with Ralph Snark, the accountant gone mad. And now, the all-new adventures of Slimer and the real Ghostbusters. Come and see the Ecto-1 live at the San Diego Comic-Con.
Our story starts in 1988, and I would say for better or worse, Go Nagai was inspired by Stan Lee being hyperactive in Japan, DC Comics booming in popularity at the time, and so Uncle Go decided to somehow do his best shot at breaking into the US comic book market by making his own kind of Elseworld story of Mazinger, specifically skewed towards Americans. Ironically, at the same time that DC had just started making their own Elseworld stories, starting with the steampunk Batman story Gotham by Gaslight, and starting their own Elseworlds label. Now, I'm honestly not sure how well thought out or valid his plan was, but I kind of get it. I kind of see the logic in it, because Mazinger Z had already aired in a limited capacity in the US under the soulless and confusing title of Transor Z. The hell's a Transor? That just sounds like a transistor. And meanwhile, Mazinger Z had been released basically uncut and uncensored, and had grown to extreme lengths of popularity in Latin America, to the point where people now to this day still build statues of Mazinger like it was some sort of god. a God Mazinger, if you will. And I'm kind of surprised that, if anything, he didn't just stick with what was already working with the basic Mazinger Z premise. Like, if I could go back in time and give Go Nagai any possible advice, I would have recommended that he just do a color comic book adaptation of the Mazinger Z TV show. Like, could you imagine a better version where Mazinger Z had just had this fantastic indie comic book run in the 80s? God, what a better timeline that would have been. Like, I'm pretty sure it will have sped up anime localization by a decade. I should probably point out that the main reason that he didn't just do that, though, that this wasn't an option, was that the Mazinger Z manga run was extremely short and lackluster, especially compared to its 100-plus episode TV run. The manga is pretty much a Cliff Notes version of the story, mostly just focusing on the events of the first and the last episodes, and cutting out the other 98 episodes in between, basically the entire story. Based on the manga, Koji Kabuto got given Mazinger Z, immediately went straight over to Dr. Hell's house and ended him, and then was retired and moving on with his life by next week. So anyway, instead, Nagai did something new. He did Mazinger USA, a full reboot with the intention that this is what he thought Americans at the time would be really into. And maybe he just wanted to make something new instead of recycling something he'd already done. And yeah, Mazinger USA, sometimes just called Mazinger, is kind of a super confusing comic because it was originally only released in 1988 in the United States in very, very small, limited quantities. But then it was eventually repackaged and released in Japan in 1999 under its final name of Mazinger USA. And this book is almost a lost media gem because it was only published once in America, once in Canada, and once in Japan, and it's now kind of a collector's item, with a handful of copies collecting dust on some ancient otaku's bookshelves. And the story itself has been mostly forgotten to time. So yeah, the story is a little bit of an oddity. So let me read this for the first time ever and give my thoughts on it. So first things first, Mazinger Z is metal as fuck. Well, it's a pretty quick read because the comic was never picked up in the US. So it's basically a one-shot pitching the story, very much a pilot pitch. And like some of Nagai's manga, there's a lot of splash pages where just robots are fighting and there's no real story. It's just pure action, which doesn't really fill time well in a comic book. So we start off with this cover page that is semi-unreadable with a heavy metal Mazinger logo. We get a good look at Mazinger. In this story, he looks more like a knight than a robot. There is actually a design reason for this in the story. It comes up later. So for now, speculate on what you think it is. And underneath Mazinger, we see some gnarly looking mechanical beasts. These definitely look a lot like Ken Ishikawa's ultra detailed mechanical artwork. I can't confirm that Ken Ishikawa worked on this or God Mazinger, but a lot of the designs here look like his work. And there's definitely a clash between his ultra detailed stuff and Nagai's relatively simple designs. And then we see this really badass UFO in the background. Overall, this doesn't seem to be too different from where we left off in God Mazinger, though, as God Mazinger ended on a very similar scene of an army of mechanical beasts ravaging on a wasteland planet fighting against Mazinger. Oh, and then the next page is just an American cover. That's just a picture of Mazinger, which works if you know what Mazinger is, and if not, it's just a cool picture. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that the big thing that makes this book unique is since it was designed to appeal to 1980s American comic book standards, the whole thing is in full color, and the whole thing is airbrushed like a heavy metal album, which makes it a very nice, unique bit of work. Like, it's a very unique and nice step up from the old school black and white Go Nagai mangas that we're used to. And so, yeah, this is probably one of the only full-color Mazinger mangas ever made, as far as I know. I think there's a few others, but I think this could be the only one. So on our first page, we just have another full heavy metal poster with Mazinger shining in the black, sitting on volcanic rock, lit by the light of an alien sun while Earth and Jupiter are flying behind him. Continuing with the heavy metal vibe is this like prayer to Mazinger underneath saying, "We chant the history of our kingdom. We chant the tale of the warrior who must never be forgotten. The warrior from another world who came bearing infinite power. This is the chant of the mysterious warrior who rescued our kingdom. This is the tale of Mazinger." The next page here is the absolute freakiest page in the entire book. The next page is this Star Wars-y alternate global timeline about how World War III happened and how it led to World War IV, and how we went from the booming 80s to World War III, which Nagai posits with some pretty bold predictions which sound crazy, but aren't too far off from what actually happened. and chillingly predict World War III starting at around 2030. Uncle Go here is predicting some global events like he's Nostradamus, and I need to lay down here that he predicted all these events in 1988, and they are borderline scary for how accurate they are. So it's 1988, and then we move on to the 1990s. In the 1990s, Nagai predicts that there would be a massive Middle Eastern conflict, mostly between Iraq and Iran. And yeah, that was basically the Gulf War and the subsequent war on terrorism, so Uncle Go's getting it right off the bat. Then for the 2000s, Nagai predicts that the Soviet Union would take advantage of the chaos caused by the Gulf War, which did happen at the time, if you consider Putin's various proxy wars and dealings in Syria. So yeah, Go Nagai is correct again. Alright, then in the 2010s, he finally has a wrong prediction. Slightly off the rails, Nagai predicted that a second Korean War would break out, resulting in a coalition of Japan and US backing up South Korea, and they would finally destroy North Korea and reunify Korea. Now, I have to chalk this one up to not happening, mostly because of the death of Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un rising to power, seemingly playing things a lot more safer and a lot less recklessly than his father did, somehow keeping the country just stable enough to keep going. So this is probably the wrongest thing he got in the predictions. But then in the 2020s, back to being kind of correct, Nagai then predicts that the Soviet Union would make a play to conquer all of Europe, which supposedly is in line with Putin's long-term goals for the Ukraine conflict. If he wins in Ukraine, he wants to go on to another country, and he wants to conquer more land. According to Nagai, NATO eventually drags the US into this war, but for whatever reason, the US just doesn't put their whole heart into it. And then by 2030, Russia has conquered all of Europe, uniting Europe into a single super Soviet Union. Now, this is bad, and this is kind of what Vladimir Putin actually has ambitions to currently do, but thankfully that doesn't seem like it's going to happen in real life because I don't think he's going to live long enough to enact his plan. Now, after this, still on a semi-realistic path, Nagai then predicts that by 2030, World War III breaks out. Not between the US and Russia, which would be obvious in fiction, but between Super Soviet Union and China, which again is seemingly set up by current events IRL, as China seems very displeased with Putin's failures in Ukraine and is seemingly planning a land grab of some chunk of Russia after the fact as payback for their failures in Ukraine, and that could turn hostile unless the Russian military is completely expended after the Ukraine war. So yeah, Nagai predicts that for one reason or another, which kind of lines up with what's actually happening. China gets fed up and tries to take back its land from Russia, and Russia is too run out of steam from fighting Europe to actually fight back, igniting World War III. India then gets involved in the conflict, seemingly fighting both sides, and while India, Russia, and China are having this three-year brawl, America finally gets re-involved in trying to re-liberate the other Western European nations from the Super Soviet Union, and eventually America and the Soviets get pissed off and eventually mutually nuke each other for mutually assured destruction. And it's very chillingly close to how close we currently are that, Nagai is making some pretty bold shots about where he thinks World War III is going to be in 2030, in 1988, and it's really creeping me out. So yeah, then he says that World War III goes on for the next 30 years despite heavy use of nuclear warheads, and by the year 2060, World War III finally ends in a nuclear holocaust where 90% of mankind is dead, as well as 4 out of 5 countries in the world. Then it flashes 80 years ahead to 2140, where new countries have been made and another 100-year war breaks out for whatever reason. And yeah, this whole page is crazy, and Nagai is just really freaking me out with the pure speculation about the future from 1988. The fact that it is so close to reality honestly scares me. He only got 2 things wrong. The only things he got wrong was that he never expected the Soviet Union to collapse, and he never expected Kim Jong-il would die, and his son would be slightly more stable than he was, preventing the collapse of North Korea and the Korean unification. But yeah, this is honestly scaring me that World War III is going to happen soon. Hope everybody's all right. Anyway, let's talk about Mazinger USA. All right, so there's one more needless surprise time skip. So the story starts On Earth in the year 2200X. It's now a post-nuclear wasteland devoid of water, where the living envy the dead, and giant robot super soldiers stalk the Earth, stealing and killing and basically making everyone's lives miserable. World War IV is an endless Gundam-style war fought by giant robots, and we immediately have a clear look at a robot coming into the foreground that looks like a silver Zaku from Gundam. I again have to wonder if Ken Ishikawa worked on this, because all the robots here super feel like his kind of art. We then zoom out and there's a whole fleet of these various different nightmare mecha guys flying out of this big warship. It's a flying warship. It kind of looks like a cross between the space battleship Yamato and a UFO. And each one of these guys looks like they could be like the poster boy for a bad 90s video game cover. You know the ones. So the robots are leading a war against the Dome City that immediately fires dozens of missiles at them. The Dome City also have these laser cannons, but then they find out that the lasers have no effect on the robots. By the way, the first time I read this, I had no context for what the fuck was going on, but later I realized that the robots are the bad guys invading the Dome City, and the Dome City are the good guys. This is never clarified and only hinted at the end of the book, so I feel like I should tell you guys now. Then we get a lot of flashy battle panels, and there's this robot that gets cut in half that sort of looks like the ARC-78 Gundam, and the robot doing the cutting kind of looks like the Dunbine, or maybe the Evangelion, but Evangelion hadn't come out yet. Then finally the narrator comes back to tell us what the fuck is going on. It is now the year 2200X. Hostilities between northern and southern countries have grown in fury as savage combat wages across the earth, with new and ever more destructive weapons laying waste to the once pastoral fields of green. The remnants of mankind have burrowed deep beneath the surface, becoming a subterranean race of mole people. Their citadels screened against deadly baths of radiation. They poke through the soil like mutant flowers, their warriors encased in giant combat armor, protecting them against the poisonous air that once gave them life. They live only to fight, and with luck, maybe they'll fight again. Today, as every day, the flames of war rage in every corner of the globe. War without quarter, war without end, war without race that has forgotten all ways of life. So yeah, the opening premise of Mazinger USA is heavy metal as fuck. It's 2200X. World War III turned into World War IV, somehow became an endless war where people fight with no other reality except more fighting, and there's absolutely nothing to look forward to. The human race have become a race of cultureless barbarians again, like in caveman times. The Earth is a completely polluted wasteland with nothing good on it. It sounds like everyone on Earth is just this pirate soldier who just rapes and steals and plunders from each other. And I seriously have to wonder what the hell they're doing for food, if everyone is a robber pirate baron. Is everyone a cannibal? Is there like Star Trek style infinite food? The next page is another heavy metal as fuck art spread showing this Geiger-esque alien skull in front of a sea of nuclear missiles while these metal stormtroopers walk through a field of human skulls. This never goes anywhere, but it's fucking cool as hell. And then we go back to the flying warship. The warship just is shooting endless missiles, dropping endless mecha, just shooting everything, wrecking everything. It's just fucking hell all over. The story finally starts on page 17. After all that fucking prologue and all that fucking heavy metal shit, after all that sick heavy metal art and all that timeline backstory, we are finally introduced to our main character, Major Kabuto. I'm not sure if his first name is Koji, but I really want to call him Koji because he's got that Koji Kabuto face. And yeah, he just looks like Koji Kabuto to me. Maybe he's a relative of Koji Kabuto, you know, he's Major Kabuto. But yeah, he's just Koji Kabuto with a boring haircut of a crew cut. And he's got like a red highlight on top. Kind of like a low-maintenance Shadow the Hedgehog haircut. I don't really dig the style, but it's definitely the shortest hairstyle I've ever seen a Nagai protagonist rock, so I guess it's unique. So Major Kabuto is here talking to a woman who tells him that the enemy is using a new combat armor, and we get some very weak, very cliche dialogue here. I'm guessing since Nagai's English wasn't that great, he kind of focused on just making like a heavy metal hardcore art story. So Kabuto goes into the hangar where his mechanic Jack has Mazinger all decked out and ready to launch out of the airship or the city. Its feet are dangling out of the floor, so I thought this was in the airship. I don't know. Then I thought they were defending the city. And also it looks like the arms would actually fit out of the hole, so maybe the hole opens up more, or maybe I'm reading the scene wrong and it's not actually a hole at all. All right, next page. And hey, what the hell? Mazinger Z has the cockpit from Getter Robo 1. Ken Ishikawa definitely worked on this. Although I do like that this version of Mazinger's jaw actually has an actual functionality of sealing the cockpit shut after you close the door. This is the first time I've seen Mazinger's jaw good for anything aside from firing Rust Hurricane. So yeah, Major Kabuto launches off in Mazinger. It does the gashin sound when it's turned on. And yeah, there's a lot I like about this Mazinger. It feels like they tried to render it less like an anime robot and more like something you'd see in a live action movie. Like, I don't know what it is, but it definitely reminds me of something out of like 80s film tokusatsu, like Stray Dog or like Mechanical Violator Hokkaider. Then there's a bunch of pages of just senseless splashy combat, which you can basically read in a second. As Mazinger stories through a cloud of smoke, Mazinger whips out his broadsword and starts mowing down enemies left and right. Another Zaku-like character comes out with a shotgun and a beam saber, but Mazinger just ends him violently. And now I'm really starting to love this story when... oh no, what's this? Suddenly, an isekai happens! No! I just wanted to read a normal World War IV with a robot story. What the hell? I don't need another isekai right now. No, isekai! So, yeah, we're in an isekai world. Oh god, what is this place? Is it fucking Mulanis again? What is this awful place? Oh god, no! Oh god, no! It's God Mazinger! No! The story fucking suddenly turned into God Mazinger again, but slightly different. No! Go Naga, you were doing a cool original premise. Why? Why did you throw down a pointless isekai mechanic to rerun your own material here? God damn you, Go Naga! You were doing good and then you threw it all away. Okay, so yeah, I was loving this comic up to now. I thought it was going to be an American post-apocalyptic future take on Mazinger, more in line with Gundam and whatever. But instead, Mazinger gets the fuck blown up and dies and reincarnates on fucking God Mazinger's isekai world. So this is now God Mazinger 2.0. So if you haven't seen my previous videos on God Mazinger, the anime and the manga, I overall really enjoyed the story of God Mazinger the manga, primarily because it dealt with the idea of modern Japanese teenagers getting isekai'd, sent back into a lawless, prehistoric barbarian world where they mostly got horrendously murdered by the established murderers who lived there. But hey, at least the main character got to hook up with a beautiful primal princess. But anyway, now in Mazinger USA, Naga has flipped the script on its head, that it's a lawless future barbarian Koji Kabuto isekai'd into a still lawless medieval fantasy dinosaur world land, and the hooking up will not happen despite Koji's will to do so. So I had mentioned in my God Mazinger review back in the day that it felt like God Mazinger got canceled prematurely, and Nagai had been seeding a bunch of subplots that all got cut off at the root pretty unfantastically. It feels like now, for whatever reason in USA, he's trying to do it all over again, but he only has one volume and he doesn't have time for any of that. So here we are now halfway through this book, and for whatever reason, we've rebooted the premise so that now this is an isekai God Mazinger scenario, except in this case, instead of the pilot coming from modern Japan to pilot an ancient magic Mazinger, it's a post-apocalyptic future Mazinger with a post-apocalyptic future pilot randomly going to an isekai world to fight dinosaurs. So we're introduced to Princess Krishna, who is literally a copy-paste of Iramu from God Mazinger again, except to differentiate her, she's blonde, and she has a unicorn, and her tits are out the entire goddamn comic, which really surprises me as this was tailor-made for American audiences. This got published in the US with a main female character who is topless nonstop, having full uncensored all the time uncovered boobs. It got published in the nation state of Chicago. Is that just okay for Chicago? I guess maybe it was in the 80s, but goddamn. Iramu had her boobs out like a couple of times, but Krishna has her boobs out like 80% of her screen time. Did anyone tell Go Nagai that America does not allow you to publish titties, especially not in a kid's action story for little kids? Titties on every goddamn page. Damn it, Go Nagai. Make up your mind about who your target audience is. Oh my god, look at all this. Okay, so replacing Lord Eldorado from God Mazinger, the Princess Krishna has a new enemy named Zard, taking over the role of the cliche bad guy. Zard really looks like he's Emperor Gore from the Dinosaur Empire in Getter Robo, making me once again think that Ken Ishikawa had to be heavily involved here. There's too many of his trademark art designs here. He has 4 arms. He has a helmet kind of reminiscent of something from the Mazinger universe. Maybe it reminds me of a particular machine beast, but I am on the whole digging that this is kind of God Mazinger again, but seemingly with Ken Ishikawa more heavily involved. Okay, so then Mazinger shows up on the scene, decapitates the shit out of Zard, and rescues the princess. And wait, what's this? Mazinger is the same size as the princess. Oh my god. Go Nagai, you sick fucking freak. Is that what you're into this week? Is that what you wanted to see? So yeah, here we go. In a twist semi-stolen from Macross, Mazinger has arrived at an isekai world populated with giant people at war with hyper-intelligent dinosaurs of relatively the same size. Kind of makes me wonder why he did so much work semi-accurately in predicting how we got to World War III for the story's prologue, but here we are. Now this is a story about Mazinger fighting dinosaurs on a world of giant people. So then, in an extremely welcome departure from the non-stop violence we've had on every page up to now, Princess Krishna invites the giant robot Mazinger Z over for a delicious dinner. And then we have several more pages of exposition explaining the history and story of this now ridiculous isekai world we've ended up in. So this isekai world is the kingdom of Lithgor, ruled over by Princess Krishna at war with the Zard Empire, who totally seems to be the dinosaur empire from Getter-Robo, and just like the dinosaur empire from Getter-Robo, true to its typical dinosaur empire cliches, the Zard Empire wants to kill all humans and take back their land, because they were there first. A hilariously petty, purely evil villain motivation. So there's been this long-running dinosaur versus human war in this world now, and only the kingdom of Lithgor remains, as the Zard Empire has mostly conquered the world and killed off a majority of humanity on this earth. They show Krishna's father, who kind of looks like Zeus from God Mazinger. He's the High King of Lithgor, and he apparently tried to surrender to the Zards. He was going to sign a peace treaty with them when the humans were losing, but it didn't work out. See, the dinosaurs just decided that since he was already losing, they lured him into an ambush and they arrowed him to death, because why bother negotiate with someone who's already surrendering to you? And so Krishna was the sole survivor of the event, which is very lucky for her because she refuses to wear clothes. On a planet where arrows are apparently the leading cause of death. Major mistake. So at dinner, Krishna and Mazinger Z the robot seem to have a pretty damn romantic and flirtatious first date. Krishna pretty much begs Mazinger Z to join her army as her knight because they're low on men, and Mazinger seems to be a complete badass when it comes to fighting, and none of her men really have that fighting spirit anymore. Now Mazinger seems very uninterested at first, but then Major Kabuto seemingly comes on strong and stupid with insane levels of riz, propositioning that by all accounts, Princess Krishna is the barely dressed blonde woman of Koji's dreams, and so based on the fact that he's always wanted to date a blonde woman, and he's decided that she's the world's most perfect woman, and also the world's largest woman, he agrees to fight for her if she will tell him straight out at that time if he has a chance with her romantically. All she has to do is say yes, and then he promises that he will give her his incredible power and win this war for her single-handedly. Now, she takes a moment to consider his proposal and agrees with him 3 things. Number 1, that she is a woman. Number 2, as a woman, she needs a romantic partner. And number 3, Mazinger sorta looks like a man she might have dreamed about in a dream, just being tall enough to meet the standards that she has for a romantic partner, I guess. But then she also goes on the line and says that her first responsibility is to her people, and that if Mazinger will definitely help her win the war, then she will surrender to any desires he has as a form of payment. And, wow. But then Kabuto warns her that he is a man from another world, and therefore he is not like any other men she's ever met before. Krishna starts to get nervous about this line, and at this point she starts to cry, but says she needs his power and will love him no matter what he looks like. And I want to imply here that the way she phrases it kind of seems like she's thinking he's going to be scarred or ugly. But anyway, she forces Kabuto to remove his helmet at this time, and ta-da! This is totally a comic book where an extremely confident giant robot pilot is trying his goddamn hardest to riz a 60-foot woman. Almost just because he had the opportunity to, and he wanted to shoot his shot to see if he could. Krishna is shocked by this, and Koji plays out the scene entirely for the stand-up comedy routine that it is. Angry for the first time in his life, he's found a beautiful half-naked blonde woman willing to settle for him, but she just has to be 60 feet tall, so that's a problem. Now Krishna finds the whole thing very amusing and thinks that Koji must be a fairy. Koji goes on to say that no, they're both human, he's just on a different world where somehow humans evolved to be bigger. The atmosphere is the same, but the gravity is weaker, so I guess the implication here is that the weaker gravity made all life on the planet grow to be larger. That's a true science fact, right? Or maybe Nagai just wanted to give Koji an excuse to do super jumps easy. Anyway, Krishna is now totally relieved that there's no possible way that Koji can actually get to third base with her, so she doesn't have to treat him seriously as a romantic interest now. And then there's this weird backdoor connection to the book Gulliver's Travels, implying that the author of the book, Jonathan Swift, visited this world before in the 1800s and wrote the book as a half-confession to his adventures there. Shout out if there are any Gulliver's Travels fans in the audience. I haven't heard about that one since the 90s. Anyway, Krishna agrees to love Koji as a pet. Hey, comment section, leave a comment if you would be a pet for a half-naked, 60-foot woman. Maybe it would work out for you. I bet she feeds you some gigantic table scraps. So anyway, the next day is the big battle. Mazinger Z rides into battle riding a gigantic yak, and Krishna finally puts on a suit of armor that would deflect arrows and also doesn't show her nipples. And the two of them lead the armies of men into battle against the Zard Empire's lizard riders. Mazinger jumps ahead of the army and then unleashes absolute hell with a full barrage of missiles that go everywhere like the space runaway Idion. And just when the story is starting to look promising, just when it's starting to get interesting, Mazinger somehow un-isekais and goes back to World War IV on the hell planet of Earth. One of Kabuto's friends is standing there and informs him that he's been missing for an entire month and declared dead. Koji realizes that he's only been gone for 24 hours, a full day, and wonders that if either A, the isekai world has a slower time clock where one day is 1 month, or B, somehow traveling back and forth to the isekai world somehow makes you lose a month in time. Now those are great questions, and those will never be answered because the story is just about over. On the last page, Koji daydreams for a second about everything that happened and wonders if it was all a dream, that he was in a fantastic world where women don't wear shirts and you can fight dinosaurs. But before he can even deeply get into detail explaining about how shirtless the women were, the enemy dreadnought attacks again, and Mazinger is drawn into another battle. And again, we see this as an unfinished story, and that the super death battleship is bearing down on the domed city, and I guess Mazinger is fighting the battleship, not the city. I'm reading that the city are the good guys and the battleship are the bad guys, because they're a battleship, so they want to battle. Anyway, Koji can't get a break because he's still a man who knows only how to fight in a civilization of endless fighting in an endless war, and that's the end of this stupid story. The end. Hoy. Okay, that was rough. Damn. The story gave me some major whiplash. Now, I appreciate this as like an art book. I really appreciate all the gorgeous art. And I guess I can appreciate it after reading God Mazinger, because it strongly feels like, by all accounts, this was a weird and misguided attempt by Nagai to reboot God Mazinger again, but a little bit differently, and somehow for American audiences. Was Nagai just completely stuck in a rut at this time trying to make God Mazinger work? It totally feels like he just mad-libsed out some of the elements of God Mazinger and jumbled up the plot elements and tried again. Also, I miss Karu. Karu was kind of the underappreciated MVP of God Mazinger, kind of the heart of the story, kind of the most interesting part of the story, and God Mazinger without Karu just isn't fun. Now, the action at the start of this comic seemingly similar to the action at the end of God Mazinger when all the ancient alien machine beasts showed up, and I kinda am impressed the way this had so many of the same elements of God Mazinger, but just utilized them completely differently, and in many cases more weakly than God Mazinger did, because God Mazinger had more time to set them up. Anyway, this comic is a weird artifact. On one hand, it's the first English Mazinger content, despite being some of the dirtiest with all the boob shots. Although in the grand scheme of Go Nagai content, the story is borderline G-rated compared to some of the wild, nasty crap he did in God Mazinger and some of his more crazy stories, except for the fact that Krishna's boobs are very prominent in every single page where she appears. So yeah, I'd chalk the lack of violence up to this just being a one-shot comic, but I'm actually surprised that there isn't so much violence. There's really only one bloody kill and a ton of sexual gratuity. The only thing that happens that's like super violent is the General Emperor Gorgai getting his head chopped off. Overall, I'm not sure what to make of this comic. You can almost contemplate the Lithgore isekai plot as being a daydream, except it's proven by the time dilation of Koji being gone a month. I kind of really wanted to know more about what was going on in the World War IV world and that plot, but I guess Go Nagai didn't want to go there. But if he didn't want to go there, why did he meticulously step out the path of how the world went from the 1980s to World War IV, which honestly has freaked me out because 80% of what he predicted came true by now. But yeah, overall, this world is super vaguely figured out. Like Mazinger is just a mobile suit. Koji, Major Kabuto, is just a soldier. I don't even know if his first name is actually Koji because he's just Major Kabuto, so maybe his first name was actually Major and I've been dead naming him the whole time. I don't really know who's attacking the Dome City or what's so even great about defending it. And on the isekai world, all I know is that there are men led by a half-naked princess and way too many dinosaurs for whatever reason. Alright, so that's Mazinger USA, another failed reboot of Mazinger from Go Nagai when he was at his peak. If you're a collector, I would say seek this out for some incredible full-color art, and it's 80s as fuck heavy metal Ken Ishikawa style. Like, I do love the subtle Ken Ishikawa influence here with like the Dinosaur Empire and the Getter Robo Cockpit that just make it feel like this is the closest we've ever gotten to a full Mazinger Getter combination story, which is something I always wish they would have done. Like, my fanfic daydream is that we'd somehow just get a like Mazinger Z powered on Getter Rays, but overall this story is just kind of silly and horny and doesn't go anywhere, which is weird because they do seem like they put a lot of effort into setting up the World War IV story just to throw it away and backtrack to this isekai world. But there's just kind of not enough here and not enough time spent on either worlds to like fully like get invested in either of them. So overall, this whole story seems like a waste of time because it's a short story and just not enough was set up and there's too much going on and everything's too vague in like the worst possible ways. I would borderline say the best scene in this manga is the dinner scene. The dinner scene is the only scene that, you know, shows the potential where these characters are actually likable, and maybe this comic could have worked as like a comedy manga because there's like this hilarious scene where Krishna and Mazinger Z, the robot, are eating dinner together. And that's a shining silver lining in what's otherwise a grim story about two worlds locked in a bloody, endless, eternal war. Like, if I had to take away one thing from this book, it's the dinner scene. The dinner scene is the best part of this book, and it's kind of the only thing that struck me as being new and funny because Nagai knows his comedy. And otherwise, the mecha battles seem like they're shot for shot recycled from God Mazinger, and they're otherwise not fleshed out enough to be truly unique. But on the other hand, Mazinger USA still stands out as this weird and strangely unique attempt at localizing a Japanese pop culture staple for American audiences who didn't know any better, albeit kind of in a weird tone-deaf way. Although it's also unique that it comes from a completely different spectrum of tone deafness since it was based on the original creators' incorrect perceptions of what American sensibilities were and what Americans of the 1980s would be into. Okay, so that's Mazinger USA, a super rare American comic book published by Go Nagai in Chicago in 1988. According to some additional information I was able to dig up, when the comic was released in 1988, it cost a rather hefty $10, which is pretty high for a comic book, especially in the 80s. Although kinda cheaper than most modern graphic novels now, which run for about $20. I want to say in the 80s, a $10 book, even with all this crazy heavy metal art, might have definitely been a turnoff for casual audiences. So then on top of the boobies on like every page, I think that's probably another reason why this book never really found an audience. Nowadays, used copies sell for over $100 on eBay, and I did find out that there was a second printing in 1992 for Canadian audiences, and in 1999, Nagai translated it to Japanese for the first time and released a Japanese translation with director's commentary, but that is also very rare nowadays as well. So if you really, really want to get this book, you're going to have to spend over $100 or just pirate it like I did. All right, let me know if you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, I'll continue on to the next Mazinger manga on the timeline. I'm out. I'm sick. My throat hurts so much. I did not expect this video to go on this long. Good night.